Hello, everyone. This is the second lecture of the biological module of the mini course on computation. And before we start, let me have a quick announcement. First, sorry for a typo in today's email. Sona is going to talk about quantum machine learning rather than quantum correlation. And as always, welcome to continuous discussion on Q&A Discord. And also please fill up the midterm survey link sent through the email today. And also I announce a little bit about ideas on concluding lecture. I want to make it become more interactive. So I'll probably only spend half of the time, summarizing, and put everything together. But in the rest of the time, I also want to have all of you, maybe not all, but some of you, speaking out, telling about what you learned and thoughts. Yeah, maybe you can share some new things to us. And finally, the lectures next week will focus more on philosophy. And this will be much less intense than this week. So it will be much more interactive, and you are welcome to stay and discuss. Yeah, but today we still are going to cover a bunch, but I'll still try to keep the pace as slow as possible to make sure people can get a lot. And the focus of today is going to be evolution and neuroscience. And as I recall, 2 days ago, we have our first lecture in biology module, talking about lots of different examples of how computation and biology interplay with each other. And today we are going to focus on two, in my opinion, the two biggest mysteries in biology. One is evolution, which studies throughout times, how life, or what's the origin of life. And the second mystery is lighting ourselves, is our brain, how does our brain really work? And we are going to look at these two mysteries through the lens of computation. Okay. So first, evolution. So in a very abstract sense, to me, evolution is the study of how structure and randomness interplay with each other and have some emergence property that we see in the beautiful world. Yeah, so there are many different species, and even with it, in each species, there might have subspecies, and there's also some individuals difference. And the central questions asked in evolution is then what's the underlying reason for such a diversity and similarity happen at the same time? How come there seems to be lots of randomness, but there are also lots of structures? Yeah, what's the underlying reason, and how can we try to have our own understanding on that? And as many of you might know, yeah, nowadays we know this guy Darwin's proposed very nice theory of evolution, and coined as a nature selection. But this nature problem about studying the biodiversity of the world has long been discussed, even back to the ancient Greek, like Aristotle. Yeah, and at that time, maybe what he is thinking is something like, oh, the useful form survive. Yeah, he's a maybe more philosophical person. So when he said useful form, he didn't specify what does that mean. But you probably already can see some feeling, some taste of computation within, because he's kind of thinking of evolutions as kind of just outputting something still useful. Yeah, for those not useful, maybe it won't be kept. So this already suggested some feeling of, oh, there are some computation going on, maybe in the process of evolution, how we can have such a biodiversity for having structure. Yeah, and maybe close to Darwin's time, there's also some other proposal. Yeah, something like, oh, maybe some individual during their lifetime, they acquire some new characteristics, learning some new stuff, and those stuff will be inherited. So this is by Lamarck. And there's also lots of a companion series, by Bowens or etc. But we all know that now the scientific field kind of basically reached a consensus where Darwin's theory is like what people believe as a fact or like as what's the underlying reason for evolution. And Darwin actually proposed those theory based on his amazing Beagle expeditions, where he traveled around the world in these 5 years and see so many like real examples and real like I think maybe also some fossils and also different species, etc. And like probably I think like more than 20 years after the Beagle expeditions, Darwin finally consolidated his concept of natural selection, which is now regarded as the in the science community as the reason for evolution. And this is his famous The Origin of Species by the means of natural selection. I also find the subtitle quite interesting here for people. Yeah. But what exactly like natural selection is? Yeah, and how does it relate to computation? And in this course, yeah, in this lecture, I try to give a more high-level description of natural selection and try to let you see, like insights there indeed some computation thinking. So as a warning, yeah, this is not a traditional treatment in the biology department. So if you want to receive a more solid like explanation, you probably need to find some reference. I'll try to post it later. Yeah, so to me, there are 3 essences of natural selection, the underlying idea. The first is the concept of common descent. So if you remember from the introductory course, I mentioned, oh, me and my cat Shiba, actually we are phylogenetically close. What does that really mean? It actually means that the genes, yeah, in me and inside Shiba actually are very, very close, very, very similar. Most of the genes are looking very, very similar. And this is even similar in the sense that we really can draw a tree, big tree, putting all the species on this tree. And in the end, these phylogenetic trees will connect everything together. We are all common descendants of some very, very ancient original species. Yeah, and by the way, this is a true tree, but I just make it an animation. Indeed, we are actually closer to a rabbit than closer to a cat. And the second idea is called heredity and variation. And the central idea is the following. Maybe we have parents, and when they have a baby, there might be some genetic like a mutation, some variations happen in the baby, denoted as this the yellow things. Yeah, and this variation, this mutation will still be kept even after the baby grow up, and then might be heredited to its children. Yeah, so this is saying that this concept of heredity and variation is saying that, oh, there are some randomness can happen, yeah, during like the heredity process and can also be kept. And finally, there's the concept of competition and fitness. And let me use classic examples of black and white butterflies to explain this. So imagining that there's like a black and white butterflies living in the forest, and there are some owl, maybe not owl, maybe other birds, yeah, but somehow they like to eat those butterflies. And in normal situation, the owl eats both type of butterflies, and the butterfly will go back, so it kind of reach an equilibrium. So both black and white butterfly will survive. But now imagine after the industry revolution, there are some factory like polluted the environment and make everything very dark. So it is likely like the owl can see the white butterflies better than the black one. So it will eat more white butterflies, and in the end, only black survive. Yeah, so this is saying that kind of like white and black, they compete in some sense. Yeah, and in this environment, the black butterflies has higher fitness to the environment, so then it survives. So if we put all this together, we can come up with new ways to like see how structure and randomness like interplay with each other in evolution. Yeah, but before I put all this together, maybe I want to quickly say like, but this is just a theory for now. Yeah, but why Darwin's nature selection idea different from its ancestor, and especially how to prove, here I put quotation mark, how to prove the validity of nature selection. And in short, this is actually done by like two extremes. One is down to the microscopic view of studying the genetic sequence of a different species. Yeah, likewise talk about the phylogenetic tree. Yeah, when people can rebuild a tree, they really see there's this very, very smooth transitions like in the branch of a species. And also on fossil side, people can also see the smooth changiness of like our gene expression. Like, or like technically this is called like a phenotypes, I think. Yeah, and maybe I'll stop here just for the what do I mean by natural selection is justified, they are proved, but it's actually much more subtle and it's a very interesting discussion. So I'll probably postpone it to the philosophy lecture. But hopefully at this point, I convince you the three concepts of natural selection, the common descent, the hereditary variation, and competition fitness kind of make sense and have their support. So if you believe me in that, then now basically natural selection have already provided a new angle for you to see the world. In particular, let me first before I use the animation, I denote mutation using this, and this is like selection, selected out. So it's like in the very beginning, this is some ancient species. Maybe there's some new mutation happen, so it branch out. And then for each surviving branch, oh, this one probably should have survived. Then it might keep mutating, yeah. And then some other selection might happen again and keep mutating. And you can see that this process even might not be really synchronous. It can be very asynchronous and happening again and happening again. Yeah, so lots of the branches got selected out or eliminated at some point, and some survive. So through this kind of mutate and selection, you can see that it's already like producing certain kind of a structure, because this is not a complete tree. It's like not everything can survive. There are certain structuralizing. And through this lens, yeah, you can try to have a different sense and different view on trying to see why there are such structure and randomness inside this beautiful world we are living in. But what's the underlying computation? So this probably already hint a little bit like the underlying computation potentially is the interplay with mutation and selection. But can we say even more on that? And the answer from my side is actually yes. I think there are much more. And before I giving you more example, yeah, like just this simple view, maybe it's a good time for taking some quick questions. And even if you don't have concrete questions, you can try to just wrap up a little bit on what you have heard and question yourself, and also question me a little bit. Okay, I didn't see question. Okay, so as I claimed in the previous slides, I say, oh, evolution like provides a new way for us to see the world. And here I want to use more concrete examples to convince you that actually it can be quite diverse, applicable to lots of stuff. And the first example I'm going to give is actually a classic examples in evolutionary biology called sexual dimorphism. And the second topic is more controversial a little bit. It's called group selection. And finally, I'll talk about something probably modern people all know. It's called meme. Yeah, it might seem weird, like how does meme related to evolution, but you will see in a minute. But let's start with the first example called sexual dimorphism. Yeah, so look at these three species. This is called Mandarin ducks. You can see one of the sex looks very fancy, but the other looks very normal like me. And the middle one is called Queen Alexandra's birdwing. It is on Wikipedia, it says the largest species of butterflies, but I'm sorry, I should have checked with my roommate, who's an expert in butterfly. And the third species is called triple-whorled sea devil. Yeah, you can see one sex is super large and the other is just here. Yeah, so I encourage you to guess a little bit. I'll let you guys have 5 seconds to guess which are biological female, which are like a biological male. Okay, you have 5 seconds. Okay, so here's the answer. The fancy duck and the butterfly on the bottom and the little one are males, biological males, and all the other are female. Okay, I'm not sure if you're correct, at least for me, I think I only got this one correct, probably. Yeah, but so you can see, so in the biological world, yeah, two sex might look so different. No, not only just on the outlooking, but shape-wise can also be so different. So a natural question is then trying to ask, what's the underlying mechanism? Why the two different sexes can look so different? Yeah, and it turns out that in evolutionary biology, at least in the traditional study, actually there are 2 ways for people to explain this kind of like sexual dimorphism, and it is traditionally known as like 2 ways of sexual selections. And before I talk about this, I just want to emphasize a little bit. This is more like a classic view, and there are also some new series proposed nowadays. But in these 2 traditional ways to explain sexual dimorphism, the first is called intersexual selection. So it is saying that the selection forces, meaning that after you have some mutation, like what's the underlying forces that determine whether an individual will be kept, it is through the interaction between different sexes. Yeah, so in the example of the duck, it's like because when they are mating, maybe the female will choose the one who looks more fancy and beautiful because she hopes her kids will also like that. So this is like a selection force across different sexes. But there could be also some intrasexual selection in the way that maybe like individual of the same sex, they want to compete because they want to compete for mating with the other sex. So like in the example of moose, or maybe this is not moose, I might be wrong. Yeah, they will have like a very long attacking scenes so that they can compete with each other. So you can see that in this example of sexual dimorphism, the selection process can be much more complicated than you would first imagine. There could be multiple selection forces, either intersexual or intrasexual, like compete with each other. It's a balanced process. And the second example I want to talk about is called group selection, and it's actually originated from the observation of Darwin, saying that, oh, a tribe of moral men should have like immense advantage over like a group of like a pirate. Yeah. So intuitively, this maybe makes sense, but also I want to emphasize this is a little bit controversial. In particular, when you talk about humans, it's always a controversy. Yeah, but if we put that away first, yeah, even you want to talk about the using the lens of natural selection on like groups of individuals, yeah, they are immediately coming up with lots of difficulties. Yeah, so first, because groups like contain more individuals, so the selection process happens in like a multiple levels, because there could be some selection forces, yeah, like in the individual level and maybe in the small group level, in the larger group levels. So there are like lots of different interplay together. Yeah, and in particular, those interplays might even contradict to each other. which make the analysis, and like if you want to really prove that in the biological sense, it will be extremely difficult. Yeah. And especially when you talk about human, this can be even more complicated, because human actually do lots of even more complicated stuff, like this famous quote by E.O. Wilson, which is a great evolutionary biologist that passed away actually a few weeks ago. He says, in a group, selfish individual will beat altruistic individuals, but a group of altruistic individuals beats group of selfish individuals. So there's some interesting things going on here, and you can see there are multiple forces like interact with each other. So it will be less clear on like how to have a clean understanding, but natural selection still provide us a way to look at it. And to give people a feeling, yeah, although we cannot use very fancy example to illustrate all these points, but I still want to use this example, which is maybe much simpler. It's called Fungus dilemma. So in this example, we actually are looking at E.O. Wilson's favorite species, ants. Yeah, so people observe, I think in Arizona, there are this type of ants. I cannot pronounce their names, too fancy, but they observe that there are two types of queens in the ant colony. One type of queen are very aggressive, in the sense that this colony will only have a single queen. But in some other colonies, yeah, also in Arizona, this same species of ants, there might be more than one queen in the same nest. Yeah, meaning that those queens, they can can cooperate with each other. Yeah, so this might looks a little bit weird. Yeah, they are in the same species, and they're both in Arizona. Like why both types of queen can exist? Yeah, what's the difference that make sometimes it's aggressive and sometimes it's cooperative? And one theory proposed by this group of people is like they proposed the reason why it is aggressive, probably because the colony in that sub-region of Arizona is slightly spread out. Yeah, so in one nest, the queen needs to be like a leader to lead everyone. So you need to be aggressive so that another potential queen cannot beat her. But in the sub-regions of Arizona, where the colony density maybe is much denser, there might be started to have some competition across different colonies in the region. Then having more queens maybe can be helpful, because like if you can cooperate well, then you can prevent from the attack from other colonies. So you can already see that, yeah, when you talk about larger scales, yeah, of animals, like in the group level, in the colony level, there will be more like factors like placing this the selection process. Yeah, and this is it's actually already the simplest example I can find. And there are other cases, and usually are much more complicated. And the point here is like there are multiple levels. Okay. And finally, comes to maybe people's favorite examples about means. And thanks for Jaspreet provided this means. And because Jaspreet is the friend I know who know lots of means. And this is a very good means about mathematics. Yeah. But how does means really related to natural selection? So this is actually originated from the observation of this Richard Dawkins, who is a very famous evolutionary biologist, who also writes some very famous book like Selfish Genes. He has an observation that, oh, humans' culture actually also transmitted in a way very similar to gene. Yeah, it's very similar to natural selection in the sense that, for example, in this memes, yeah, if people like it, you might spread it out through internet to more people, and people might keep it. And for some other smart guy or like people who like to make memes, it might change a little bit and then spread it out again. So you can see there are like some mutation by changing it, and selection. If this is boring, then it will stop spreading out. So you can see that this kind of cultural transmission also very highly resembled by and can be explained through the lens of natural selection. And this can be even more than just things on internet. Yeah, like a political propaganda, or like a regional thought, or even scientific belief or scientific theories can kind of be viewed through the lens of natural selection in this way. Okay, so I hope through the three examples I gave, I can at least convince you that natural selection indeed provides some different lens, and also this can be much more complicated in the sense that, like, first example, we see different selection forces, and in the other example, we see like different levels of selection forces, as well as the applications in other stuff like human culture. So I hope through this example, I can give you a feeling of evolution as a computational principle, in the sense that the underlying hardware implementation maybe is why I talk about the gene and the fossil findings, how does this idea really implemented. And the middle representation and algorithm is how we talk about different examples, the concrete instantiation of the idea of a selection mutation. But in the highest level, yeah, natural selection itself is more like a principle rather than like something specified clearly on what's the input output. It is a concept that you can be flexible, it be applied in lots of different scenarios. So yeah, I hope this open you a different way to think about evolution. But before I go to neuroscience, I also want to clarify a common misunderstanding, which I also had for a long time. It's like sometimes, especially CS people, we like to view evolution as an optimization problem. It's like, oh, evolution is simply optimizing the fitness. Yeah, if something can survive better, then it will be kept by the evolution. But what I want to say is like this view might be just partially correct, and it's not really the case, in the sense that in biology, actually we think of evolution is blind. Evolution maybe doesn't have a long-term goal. It's just like blindly keep evolving. Yeah, so I just maybe here for now, just like a seed this idea in your mind, and I'll continue in the philosophy lecture about more on like the blindness of nature. Okay, so this is the part on evolution. Hope you have some new idea, new sense about the way to think evolutionary. Yeah, and maybe it's a good time for questions. Yeah. Oh, some people ask selection force all the same in history. Not really. Like you probably already can see, like it really depends on the environment, etc. And the environment can change, so the selection forces can also alter. Yes. Okay. Maybe I'll answer the rest later because I'm slightly behind my planned time. So the second topic of today is another mysteries. It's about neuroscience. And to me, it is an even bigger mystery. Yeah, you can see in evolution, people, because of natural selection, people actually already have some common ground, can think about things. But in neuroscience, in my opinion, it is much more elusive. In particular, neuroscience is like a super diverse field as well. Yeah, and there are also multiple layers, from like single neurons, which is like the basic element is the nerve cells in our brain. Yeah, to like you can maybe have a collections of neurons. They together maybe form a small network, maybe thousands of neurons. Yeah, and they maybe behave similarly, so we call it a network of neurons. But maybe multiple networks, they will together form like a subsistence. Yeah, for example, hippocampus or like thalamus. Yeah, those are already a collection of networks that are doing certain things. Yeah, and there's also like the behavior from what we observed, because sometimes we cannot directly access everything in the brain. So we also need to incorporate the behavior. And most difficultly, we even need to incorporate sometimes, if you really want to have a whole theory, you also need to consider what we vaguely call by consciousness. So hope this slides give you a feeling of the different levels in neuroscience people need to consider. And in the meantime, there's also many different approaches in neuroscience. And here, suggested by our guest speaker, Praviba, I just listed the subdisciplines in MIT Brain and Cognitive Science Department. Yeah, like you can say, yeah, they still try to divide it maybe into 4 directions, like a cellular level, system level, cognitive level, computational level. Yeah, but they also emphasize that, oh, even we do this, but most of the time, they all need to work together. And sometimes we even need to invent new area. Yeah, so you can see in neuroscience, it's not only diverse levels, and the approach people studied should also be naturally very diverse. And then, okay, what's the relation between computation and neuroscience? In particular, what do we mean by computations in the brain? So vaguely speaking, maybe when we talk about computation related to brain, maybe there will be some words already pop up in your head. For example, maybe information processing. Yeah, sounds like some computation. And when you want to process information, you need to have perception, and you might do some movement as an output. And you maybe also need to make a decision making. In the meantime, we also know that the brain is very good at learning. And when you need to learn, you need to have memory, and maybe you need the language to talk about things. And in the highest level, maybe it's about intelligence. And you need to also have cognition and consciousness to incorporate with that. And there are even much more, lots of stuff. They are all related to computation in some sense. Yeah, and they all mingle with each other. So it seems that, okay, probably people will agree with me. There are lots of computations going on in the brain, but there are so many different aspects. How do we start, and what's the possible things we can hope for in the study of neuroscience? So maybe what I'm going to propose here is perhaps we also need a Beagle expedition, what Darwin has before he has his nature selection. It is maybe rewarding for everyone who want to seriously answer the previous questions on how to understand computation in brain. We might need to see as many examples as possible. So today, the goal is to give you a very quick view and a diverse example to have a feeling on the computation in the brain. So the first example actually is probably the simplest, but you will already see the simplest one is already quite complicated. It is just a computation done by a single neuron, which is a single nerve cell in our brain. And roughly it is thinking by neuroscientists as the smallest element in the brain. And the second example is some special type of neurons called grid cells, which will be clear in a minute. But to motivate people, this is a study who in the end won a Nobel Prize. And the third example is called Inhibition Stabilized Network. So the reason why I picked this is this is actually a more abstract model. So I want to give people also exposure to how theory can be imposed and be studied in this neuroscience, which is usually more about experiments. And finally, yeah, we will also have Praviba, who is from the MIT BCS department. He will give even more example on animal intelligence. Yeah, so now let's start our Beagle expedition. So the first example is a single neuron, but maybe let me first introduce a little bit about the anatomy. So usually the simplified way to think about neurons is the following. We have a neuron, the cell has a center, it's like a soma. And there are two parts. One part is dendrite, who you receive the signal from other neurons. And you also have axons where the signal goes out. And at the interface where dendrite and axon interact with other neurons, people call it like synapse. So it could be the case like this neurons, it is connected to other neurons in this way. And the way signal, like signal here is an electric signal transmitted in the brain, could be like the following. Yeah, like this neuron have some activity, electrical activity, and then fire, and through the synapse, like affected this the soma of this neuron, and maybe the other one also fire, and collectively the potential, the electrical potential, maybe reach certain level, and this neuron in the end will also produce an electrical pulse and then send to its downstream neurons. So this is roughly the toy model you can think about neuron in your head. But I also want to emphasize this is oversimplified. And usually in the brain, actually, this is not really the case. There will be much more complication. And this is exactly what I want to convince you next slide, that even single neuron, due to the diversity potential way of firing and connection, it actually seems to already do lots of non-trivial computation. Yes, so single neuron can already be quite complicated and diverse, and how to see that. And the reason is like there are many factors that decide the neuron's activity, not just like what I simply say, oh, like electric pulse and pass on. First, there are like different ion channels. So due to a different concentrations of some chemicals things, yeah, the activity might alter and might be different in some ways. And also there are like neurotransmitter near the synapse. Yeah, also similarly, the chemical mechanism there can also affect like what's the real behavior of a neuron, but I won't dive into detail there, just let you know there's this possibility. And finally, like the way like axon and dendrite they connect to other neurons could also matter, because the geometry of interconnection can also affect what the joint activity looks like, and so on. So just want to give you a feeling that, oh, even just single neuron, you already probably can have a diverse functionality, diverse computation. And to give some concrete example, these are all like a very common like cell types observed in the brain. The first one is called pyramidal cells. It is known as like having only one axons, like output, only one output, but have multiple input dendrites. Yeah, so it's like integrating its input. And the second one is even more crazy. This is called Purkinje cells. It's also in the cortex. Yeah, its dendrite looks like a complicated trees. Yeah, you can see this tree even have like a lot of deep branch, etc. And I think there are thousands of, at least thousands of dendrites in this Purkinje cells. And this is olfactory cells. Yeah, they can have this very spatial structure, very organized way. Yeah, and this is even like nowadays people propose this is related to something called hash function we mentioned in the beginning of the lecture. Yeah, so the interconnection can also matter a lot. And finally, their firing activity, their electric pulse activity could also diverse. Yeah, like they can have this kind of tonic spiking, meaning that if the input change to a higher like electrical level, it will like constantly, like periodically fire. And for some type of neuron, it only fire when the phase changes. Yeah, when the input tuned to the higher voltage one. And there's even more. So you can see that, yeah, there are indeed lots of different computation going on in the brain, going on in the single neurons level. And now let's move a little bit higher. Let me give you a second example of grid cells. And you can look at this video where there's a mouse running inside boxes. Yeah, it is, and its head is connected to some fancy device. And in particular, on the other side of the device, it is connected to one single cells in the mouse brains, and that cells is called grid cells. And when there's a little dot here, it means that that specific cells have an activity, either fire an electric signal or fire a spike. Yeah, and the observation people have is like for these single cells, it only have like activity roughly in this hexagonal lattice pattern. So maybe I can have a pose here. You can see roughly, yeah, although not mathematically exact, but roughly the activity pattern looks like a hexagonal grid. Okay. And this is like made popular and very solidly studied by these people. Yeah, and they even won a Nobel Prize, yeah, in 2014 on this work. And grid cells nowadays are still very popular, and it's still very unclear, like what it's really doing. People there still have lots of proposed theory. But in hindsight, yeah, the abstract way to think about it is like, oh, we have a mouse running inside like a closed area, and we observe this kind of pattern for single cell receptive field. Receptive fields means like the corresponding places it will have an activity. Yeah, but also this kind of hexagonal grid is actually oversimplified. What I want to emphasize here is like in neuroscience or in biology in general, usually what you observe in the beginning is not the end of story. Yeah, it can have lots of diverse special cases which blow your mind, and those special cases actually matter. So to see the special cases in grid cells, actually people later noticed that they're not always like hexagonal grids. For example, if you're in a different shape of the environment, like this shape, or people also try other different shape, you can see that it is already not really hexagonal. Yeah, the density is like different when it is more narrow and this is wider. And an even more interesting example is the following. Now, if you let the mouse only be able to run in this hairpin maze in this special way, people observe that the firing field, like a receptive field of the grid cells, now becomes like this. It's no longer a hexagonal grid. It becomes like this periodic structure, and it is constrained by the hairpin maze. So you can see that, yeah, under different situations, these cells seems to behave differently. And some natural question will be then asking, oh, so how can these things happen? Like originally they can robustly represent the locations using hexagonal grids. Yeah, but later on when you change environment, it changed differently. What it is really doing, and if it is doing some computation, because it seems to be doing it because it's like a navigation, it can tell you, it kind of represents the location. Is it really some computation going on, and why is this? And in general, like what would be the role of grid cells in the brain? So here, I want to give you a feeling that, yeah, although in the beginning it's a simple and beautiful observation, but in the end, there can be lots of special cases and make the things really, really crazy. And but the questions we want to ask is so big, it looks so elusive. Okay, so maybe here I'll take a 10 seconds break for people to think about, oh, this is Songbird example I removed. Yeah, to think about the two examples we have mentioned. And then I will end the section, this lecture with a third example. And this example also requires people to have a vote. So the third example is called Inhibition Stabilized Network. And as I mentioned earlier, it is actually an abstract model. I want to let people have a feeling how theory, how math can potentially play a role in neuroscience. So the questions this the underlying motivation is to study cortex. And let me introduce a little bit how to think about cortex, which is an important part of the brain. So you can think of in a brain, we have input, sensory inputs through our eyes and ears, etc. And usually they will pass through, already with some layers, it will pass through somewhere called thalamus. And then you will then goes to cortex, which is a huge part of the brain. And in cortex, there will be recurrent connectivity, meaning that the neuron is connected to also neurons cortex, but also their feedbacks go back to thalamus. So cortex, it is known that through experiments, it plays key roles in lots of aspects of computation. So it's very natural to ask like, oh, but we also observe cortex recurrent connectivity and feed-forward feedback from thalamus. How does those connectivity, neural activity reconcile with each other? And meanwhile, the way to think about cortex is like, it is also highly structured. It actually have 6 layers, and they are all connected in some specific way. Yeah, it's recurrent, but it's like some layer are mapped to some and some mapped to the other. And they are like cortical columns. So it's also highly distributed. So it seems that because cortex is so distributed through different columns, yeah, it seems like it also makes sense to study some substructure of cortex, which is modeled as maybe a network of neurons. So you can think of this is just sub-regions of a cortex, and maybe there are thousands of neurons, and they roughly all connected to each other in some ways, and it doesn't really connect to something really far away. And can we isolate it out and try to study it as a motif and think about what's the potential function it is doing? So if we trying to study cortex through the network level, yeah, we might thinking of some potential motifs it is doing. And let me introduce some basic concept and basic proposal. So the first one could be, oh, the whole network, they are excitatory neuron, meaning that those neurons will make other neurons be more able to have activity. Yeah, and this is proposed as, oh, potentially because it will excite other people. So it kind of like a selecting patterns. And if you are thinking of the upstrings, it's coming from thalamus. It is also suggesting that, oh, if you have a single network being excitatory, also kind of like amplifying the input from thalamus. Yeah, but a more exciting example could be like now you have 2 networks. Yeah, one is excitatory and the other is inhibitory, meaning that making others less activated. Yeah, does it, what kind of a pattern, what kind of computation it is doing? Yeah, and it turns out that theoretically, when you study this can have a variability of cortical spiking. And this is what I want to let you think about a little bit. But due to time limit, maybe I'll jump through this simple example and directly go to an example I want you to think about, which is the case where now we have 2 populations of neurons. One is all excitatory and the other is inhibitory. Yeah, what is the activity it will look like? Yes, so let me explain the setting clear again here. So imagine there's an extra input feeding into the inhibitory populations, and the strength of the input is denoted by this I. So namely, we can actually plot it out, the firing rate or the average activity patterns of the 2 populations. We respect it to the strength of the external input. Okay, so you roughly can imagine if the external input becomes higher, it means that it kind of originally make this higher, so it will inhibit the excitatory population a lot. So the excitatory firing rate will actually go down if the external input is higher. But the questions I want people to think about right now, which I'll open. Yeah, So you probably can see on the V box. I want you to guess. Yeah, since we don't have time, I maybe just let you guess in 1 minute or 30 seconds. Which is the pattern of the inhibitory population? I'll definitely end in 3 minutes to let Sona have some time to prepare. But I encourage people, even just to randomly guess, yeah, think about like, yeah, what's the potential firing pattern? Yeah, so just to reiterate what's the setup, this is a population of neurons that will make other neurons become more silent. And this is a population of neurons that will make other neurons fire more. And this y-axis is representing whether that population have more activity. So A means that the activity will go up with the proportional to the input external input, and the B is saying that in the beginning it will go down and then go up later, etc. Okay, so maybe I'll let the poll go on, but I'll announce the answer. Yeah, due to time limit. Actually, it turns out it is B. Yeah, and it actually, the activity of the inhibitory population actually will go down a little bit, which is contradictory to maybe your first intuition, because it seems that if you add in more input to inhibitory population, the activity should go higher. But it turns out in the beginning it will go down a little bit. And to see why, you can see that actually it is because the key observation is that because when there's no external activity, because the excitatory feedback from the second population to inhibitory population is so strong, so the main reason why inhibitory population will fire is because of the second population. So now as the second populations become less active, it also makes the inhibitory population less active because this connection here also becomes weaker. So this is, so far, everything is like theoretical analysis. This is just run through some logical deduction. But it turns out that everything here actually, this kind of paradoxical effect actually is observed in the new real experiments. So it's kind of suggesting that this is things happen in the brain. But to take a step back, I also want to say, although we have this kind of observation, but you can see that it doesn't still really say about computation, concrete computation. And it seems that we are so far away from that. Yeah, so to conclude here, I give lots of different examples from diverse topics, and Prabiba will talk more. And to conclude the neuroscience part, yeah, this is an extremely diverse field, and maybe the reason why we still cannot move on is like the lack of like a principle, computational principle like natural selection. So I encourage people to read more examples and think more in this direction. So as a 10-second summary, today we talk about evolution as like a computational principle and look at lots of examples through neuroscience. And in our guest talk next week, we will have Angel talk about creativity, Zhichen talk about beauty, and Prabiba talk about intelligence. And finally, we also have a section next week on the DNA computing. And today we also have a advanced section talk about something related to the physics lecture. I encourage you to go if you are interested in seeing how statistical mechanics related to computation. Okay, so I guess I'll stop here and stop the recording. Thank you all for your attention, and sorry for being a little bit late on time.